board for EntreEd. We are so privileged and blessed to have you here. We hope that your experience has been a good one so far. Did anyone take the opportunity to go and check out downtown Pittsburgh last night? Okay, great. I'm sure you enjoyed it and had a fantastic time. Pittsburgh is just an amazing city. It's one of the reasons why we're so excited to be here. And it looks like we're really filling out the room this morning, which is great to see as well. So we're expecting, again, that you're just going to have a fantastic experience this morning. And throughout the rest of the day, we have breakout sessions, a number of topics that we know are going to be very helpful to you as you continue along your journey of entrepreneurship education. To kick this all off, we have a very special keynote speaker today that I'm very honored to be able to introduce to you. His name is Mr. Gary Schoeniger. He is an internationally recognized thought leader in the field of entrepreneurship mindset education. His message has influenced a broad audience, from institutions and economic development organizations to government and nonprofit clients worldwide, including the Ewan Marion Kauffman Foundation, the Cisco Entrepreneur Institute, and the U.S. State Department. Schoeniger has led the development of the Ice House Entrepreneurship Program, which has been recognized by the Kauffman Foundation as redefining entrepreneurship education in classrooms and communities around the world. The Ice House Entrepreneurship Program has also been featured at the United Nations General Assembly, the Papal Council for Peace and Justice at the Vatican, as well as the European Commissions in Brussels. Gary, you've gotten around with that. Nice. Okay. Gary has also, along with Pulitzer nominee Clifton Talbert, co-authored Who Owns the Ice House? 8 Life Lessons from an Unlikely Entrepreneur, an international bestseller described as required reading for humanity. So please join me in welcoming Gary Schoeniger.
Super excited to be here. I got photophobia. I can't stand still very long. But I want to start by saying thank you to Gene Colson for organizing this event. I want to thank everyone in this room for the work that you're doing to support entrepreneurship education. It was in 2007 at the EntreEd conference that my company, the Entrepreneurial Learning Initiative, got its start. I came there with an idea. We ran into some people from the Cisco Entrepreneur Institute. They hired us, and in a way it went, and that's how I met Clifton Talbert and the Ice House story. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that. But it all started right here at the EntreEd Conference 2007. Thank you, Gene Colson. Thank you all. So I want to talk about redefining entrepreneurship. And Chad asked me, a few minutes ago, what's the big idea here? And the big idea that I want to convey this morning is that, you guys are doing amazing work. You're helping transform not only students' lives, but their future and the future of our communities, the future of our economies. But the big idea here is that we need to go beyond business. We need to look at the entrepreneurial mindset as a mindset that every student will need to adapt and thrive in the 21st century. We need to go beyond entrepreneurship as a business discipline and look at it as a mindset. So that's what I want to talk about today. So, get this thing working here. So, you hear these kinds of things all the time, right? The world has changed drastically in ways that now require everyone to learn how to think like an entrepreneur. And I'm emphasizing the word think, because I want to emphasize the idea that not everyone wants to start a business. But as humans, we are all wired to pursue opportunities, to become engaged in work that matters, to have some autonomy, to have some say in our work, and to see a path towards a better life. Right? We need to think beyond just starting a business, right? So here's a little fun fact. Anyone read Friedman's latest book, Thomas Friedman's book, Thank You for Being Late? Here's a little fun fact from Friedman's book. I heard him speak in Cleveland a few months ago. So in 1990, the 3 largest companies in the United States were all in Detroit. three big car makers. Their combined annual revenue was about $250 billion, and they employed approximately 1.2 million people. Now let's fast forward about 24 years to 2014. And what happens? The big three companies have shifted. They're all on the West Coast now, right? They're all in Silicon Valley. They have about $250 billion in annual revenue. They're employing approximately 1/10 of the number of employees for that same amount of revenue. That's just one little fun fact about the world that we're going into, right? The complexity, the rate of change, the onset of globalization, artificial intelligence, technology, what have you. One of the ideas that Astro Teller put forth in a conversation with Friedman was that the rate of change is happening now at a rate that's exceeded the human capacity to adapt to change. Like our human capacity is kind of an uphill thing, our ability to adapt to change. But with technology, it's going almost straight up. I'm not sure I'm ready to buy that, but I think maybe we're not there yet, but I think we could be headed there, right? Increasing complexity, the rate of change is quite staggering. So, you know, and we all understand that entrepreneurial activity is vital to creating vibrant, equitable, and sustainable communities. Carl Schramm wrote about this in his 2006 book, The Entrepreneurial Imperative. We need to encourage and support entrepreneurial thinking at all levels of society. Right? This is not just the domain of the kids that are at Stanford or Harvard or the Ivy League. Right? We need to encourage entrepreneurial thinking to create these robust economies and robust, inclusive, equitable societies. So one of the things I'm asking you to do is to stop thinking about entrepreneurship in this, not that you necessarily are, but you know, we tend to think of entrepreneurship in this binary way. Either you are or you're not, right? And so we're sort of making these assumptions that there's some hereditary traits that are the cause of entrepreneurial behavior. I've looked at the meta-analysis. 20 years we've been trying to correlate traits, hereditary traits, with entrepreneurial behavior, and so far there's zeros, inconclusive. So we have to look elsewhere to explain entrepreneurial behavior, and that's kind of the work we've been doing. What's going on inside the mind of the entrepreneur and what's going on in the situation. Okay? And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So we see big thinkers around the world, like the World Economic Forum, making statements like this. It's not enough to add entrepreneurship on the perimeter. It's not enough to just have an entrepreneurship program after school or you know, as an extracurricular activity. They're saying it needs to be at the core of the way education operates, right? It needs to be infused in the curriculum across domains. It requires new ways of teaching. How are we going to do that? So I want to talk for a minute about the benefits of learning how to think like an entrepreneur. If you have 100 people in a room, randomly selected people, students, let's just say college students. I know that data best. If you have 100 college students in the room, about 2/3 are going to say, yes, I want to start a business at some point in my life. Right? I think it's about 2/3, somewhere around that, 64%, something like that, last time I checked. But if you ask that same 100 people, how many of you want to pursue an opportunity? I'm pretty sure every hand's going up. Right? So what are the benefits of learning how to think like an entrepreneur to the individual, right? Why would you want to learn how to think like an entrepreneur? Well, learning how to think like an entrepreneur teaches you how to recognize opportunities that other people tend to overlook, right? We learn how to recognize opportunities. We learn how to actualize those opportunities in resource-constrained, ambiguous environments. No one's there to tell us what to do, or how to do it, why to do it, and where to do it, right? So is in the pursuit of this opportunity, right? The ability to recognize opportunity ignites ambition and cultivates the attitudes, behaviors, and skills that every student is going to need to adapt and thrive in the 21st century. But entrepreneurial thinking also benefits the organization that these individuals work within. If you look at entrepreneurial attitudes, behaviors, and skills, which I'll list in a moment, they not only line up with the attitudes, behaviors, and skills that educators have been tasked with accomplishing, but they're the so-called soft skills. And doggone, I hate that word, because soft is really hard, right? But they're the soft skills that employers demand, right? So employers need entrepreneurial thinkers, the people that can identify, evaluate, they can identify and solve problems in resource-constrained circumstances where no one there is telling them what to do, right? Henry Ford wasn't looking for creative, critical thinkers. Right? That's what we need in the workplace today. And let's not forget the broader impact, what entrepreneurs are doing, right? They're inventing new products and services. They're creating jobs that are revitalizing our community. They're improving processes and procedures in our existing organizations. I found a quote, I've been thinking about this for 25 years. I found a quote that Seneca wrote in an essay on leisure in 64 AD, in which he said, "It is the duty of a man to make himself useful to his fellow man, as many as possible, because by doing so he advances the welfare of mankind." Right? So, what do people that learn how to think like an entrepreneur do? They learn how to identify opportunities even in the most opportunity-constrained environments. Whereas someone who does not have an entrepreneurial mindset will overlook opportunities even in the most opportunity-rich environments, right? So people that have an entrepreneurial mindset, they learn how to recognize opportunities, and once they recognize an opportunity, they become unstoppable, right? There's a very powerful connection between entrepreneurial behavior and the strong desire to learn. They become active, self-directed, lifelong learners. They take it upon themselves to develop the skills and the team and the people and the resources necessary to make things happen, regardless of whatever circumstances they are in. They don't make excuses. They don't cry politics. They get stuff done. Right? There is an unlimited global demand for people who can think like an entrepreneur. Stop training children to compete with computers. Right? There will always be unlimited global demand for people that can think like an entrepreneur. So, what does that mean? What does it mean to think like an entrepreneur, right? The emergence of entrepreneurship education initiatives has exploded in the last 2 decades. High schools, colleges, universities, small business development centers. Despite all this effort, startups are in a 40-year decline. I think it was 2009, for the first time in I don't know how long, over 100 years, maybe recorded in U.S. history, the number of small business deaths has exceeded the number of startups. And that's the beginning of a stagnant economy, right? When the number of startups is smaller than the number of business deaths. So the problem that a lot of us are facing is like entrepreneurship has become very popular, but it's still not well understood, right? And I'll argue that it's very narrowly defined, and it's very widely misunderstood, misinterpreted. And I want to talk about that just briefly for a second. So what does it mean to think like an entrepreneur? What do you think of when you hear the word entrepreneur? Right? I mean, social media helps create this, what a behavioral economist would call an availability bias. right? These are always in the news and social media. So it skews our thinking about what it means to be an entrepreneur, right? All these Silicon Valley stories, the Snapchat, the Uber, the Facebook, whatever, Elon Musk. That skews our thinking not only about how to be an entrepreneur, but it skews our thinking about who can be an entrepreneur. Muy importante, right? So here's a fun fact, right? If you look at all of the entrepreneurial, just startup activity, never mind entrepreneurial activity within existing organizations. If you look up all startup activity in the United States, the venture-backed startup is a tiny fraction of a single percent of all the startup activity in the United States, right? It's a tiny little fraction. So, what are we doing here? There's a visibility versus representation issue. We're putting forth this model, and I coined this term, it's called SVCD. It stands for Silicon Valley Cognitive Disorder, right? We're trying to make kids come up, run off in their, run home or go off in their dorms or whatever, come up with ideas and go chase venture capitalists around and try to get them funded. This is so wrong on so many levels, and people like Bill Auletta at MIT are starting to sound the alarm bells about this. But just one point I want to make, not only is it not represent the mindset and the methods of a typical entrepreneur, there's some serious, serious challenges. The incentive of an educator versus the incentive of a venture capitalist, right? Who are looking for what they call the gazelles, which are ideas that can go to $1 billion in revenue in 5 years, right? So it's an elite game that only a few can play and only a very, very tiny few can win. So imagine we're tasked with teaching our students about financial literacy. Why in God's name would we show them lottery winners as exemplars of financial literacy, right? A lot of people hear the word entrepreneur and they think of a small business owner, the Main Street small business owner. And we need Main Street small business owners, as we need high-growth entrepreneurs. I'm not disparaging that. That's all part of entrepreneurial activity. But what we see here in the small business entrepreneurship education realm is this tendency to conflate entrepreneurial attitudes, behaviors, and skills with managerial attitudes, behaviors, and skills. And that's where the wheels start to fall off the wagon. I was talking to my friend Greg Malkin last night about this. The attitudes, behaviors, and skills required to discover an opportunity are largely distinct from the attitudes, behaviors, and skills required to exploit that opportunity. Right? And we seem to forget that the purpose of a business is to distribute useful things. That's the purpose of a business. But what we seem to have forgotten also is that you've got to discover a useful thing first. Right? Requires the discovery of a useful thing. So, my point here I just want to leave you with is that entrepreneurship is not management. Those are two very different things. And teaching people how to manage a small business is fine. Those are real skills. Those are important skills. I'm not disparaging that in any way. But those managerial skills are toxic to the discovery process, right? So I'm going to go one step further with you because I think you're with me here, right? When we try to understand entrepreneurial behavior as a business discipline, we create a bounded rationality. We box ourselves in a way that prevents us from really understanding it. When we look at it from a behavioral perspective, it starts to make more sense, right? Not everybody wants to start a business. Everyone wants to be involved in work that matters. Everyone wants to see their work impacting other people and seeing their work lead to a better life for themselves. Right? A lot of people hear the word entrepreneur and they think about some evil bastard. Right? And there's good reason for this, right? talking about this last night also. You know, in higher ed, we see this all the time. You know, capitalism is just evil. Like, I don't want anything to do with the business. That's for those sociopaths over in the business school. I don't want anything to do with it. Right? And of course, you know, whether you think of the entrepreneur as the Silicon Valley whiz kid, the Main Street small business owner, or you know, someone, an exploitative person, there are good reasons for each of these perspectives, right? The fact is, they don't represent the boots on the ground reality of what the typical entrepreneur is actually doing, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But before I do, what I want to bring your attention to is the millions and millions of young people for whom their current understanding of entrepreneurship is irrelevant. Why do I need to study entrepreneurship? I'm not in business school. That's not in my wheelhouse, right? How do we define entrepreneurship in a way that includes everyone in the conversation about entrepreneurship, right? We got to stop thinking of it in this binary way. You either are an entrepreneur or you're not. In the 21st century, everyone is going to have to be an entrepreneurial, tongue-in-cheek play on millennial, right? So, that's the big question, right? How do we define entrepreneurship in a way that includes everyone in the conversation? You know, the original definition from the late 1700s appeared in a dictionary, I think, in a French dictionary. Just basically someone who organizes and manages a business. Right? We have to go beyond that. We have to look beyond the business creation and come up with a new definition. We need to define it in a way that everyone can be included. And so here's what I'm proposing. Based on the last 10 years of research that we've done at Eli, which includes interviewing hundreds and hundreds of entrepreneurs all over the world. Right? And if you look at the behavior, what they're doing, they're looking for opportunity. It's an opportunity discovery process, right? It's an organismic search, right? We're searching for the intersection between our own interests and abilities and the needs of our fellow human. Right? It's really quite simple. We're just not taught to think that way. Right? We're taught to think that someone else has figured out the useful thing. And we're going to work in an established organization where the useful thing has long ago been figured out by someone smarter than me, more creative than me, more rich, more powerful than me. And I'm going to be expected to fulfill a predetermined, insanely well, in some cases, defined roles. Right? Here's the script, here's the uniform, do exactly as I tell you. So two radically different assumptions. So, opportunity discovery, right? Let's go with that definition of entrepreneurship. When we think of it as opportunity discovery, everyone in this room, anyone in here not want to pursue an opportunity? Thank God. Okay, good. I'm in the right place. Right? What does that require? Right? Before I go through this list, here's what I want to tell you. What it doesn't require. Right? It doesn't require a big idea. It doesn't require venture capital or, tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars. It doesn't require a genius IQ. It doesn't require the creativity gene. It doesn't require an Ivy League MBA. It requires attitudes, behaviors, and skills that everyone in this room is very capable of developing. Right? It looks something like this. Requires empathy. Where's that coming from? Right? It comes from the idea that, I got to solve other people's problems, so I have to understand the world from other people's perspective. Right? That's how we discover opportunities. We stop looking at our own needs and we start looking around us. What's going on here? How can I improve whatever situation I'm in? What's missing? What's not working? Right? requires observation and inquiry, requires experimentation and adaptation, creativity, critical thinking, communication, collaboration. Are these looking familiar to you? Financial literacy, effective problem solving, resourcefulness, agility, self-direction, self-regulation, and lifelong learning. Those are discovery skills. Anyone here not capable of developing those skills? I didn't think so. Right? These are skills that anyone can learn to develop. They're skills that our systems of education, our family culture, our institutional culture have historically overlooked, undervalued, or straight up ignored. Right? In the thriving industrial revolution, these are skills that most kids just don't need. Right? But let's not forget, understanding how to identify, evaluate, and bring ideas to life, that's really important. And that's how I would define entrepreneurship, essentially. It's problem finding, which no one's talking about, which is a superpower, right? Understanding social and emotional as well as functional human needs. Most opportunities are not visible. People aren't walking around saying, doggone, if somebody would just make a $5 latte, then I'd be happy. Right? Howard Schultz had to figure that out through experimentation, expanded experimentation. Right? So it starts with problem finding, it moves towards experimentation and adaptation, and then it moves to advocacy and implementation. It's kind of three phases the way we look at it. But right, this behavior stems from entrepreneurial beliefs. Right? So there's a technical side of the solution, but there's also an adaptive side to the solution. After all, if knowledge was enough, we'd all, be billionaires with six-pack abs, right? Let's face it. So what are those beliefs? What are the underlying beliefs and assumptions that drive entrepreneurial behavior, right? We've tried to connect this to hereditary traits, and so far there's no correlation. When we start to look at behavioral psychology, social psychology, the picture becomes much clearer, right? What are the underlying beliefs and assumptions that drive entrepreneurial behavior? And what are the circumstances that cultivate those beliefs? Right? So what we've been looking at, what I've been trying to figure out for about 25 years, is what are the underlying beliefs and the circumstances that cultivate entrepreneurial behavior. In 1991, I got this idea, and if I could somehow figure that out, if I could somehow deconstruct the mindset, the methods, and the circumstances that cultivate entrepreneurial thinking, this could be useful to people. And not just useful to people that want to start a business, it could be useful to people that are unsatisfied with their jobs or careers. They want to do more, right? They're looking for something more. That's what I've been trying to figure out. In 2007, I presented an idea at the EntreEd conference in Charleston, South Carolina. I got hired by the Cisco Entrepreneur Institute at that conference. How my company was born. We got hired to do a gap analysis on the entrepreneurship education ecosystem in the United States and to create some content to fill the gaps. And part of that research, Cisco gave me the initial platform to go around the United States and interview hundreds and hundreds of entrepreneurs. And I could stand up here for the rest of the day and tell you amazing story after amazing story after amazing story. Now I want to be clear, the entrepreneurs that I'm interested in are not the Elon Musk and all the big name, Silicon Valley entrepreneurs. I went 180 degrees in the other direction. I wanted to understand the mindset and the methods of the underdogs and the misfits and the unlikely entrepreneurs. I wanted to know how people that came from nothing or less than nothing recognized opportunities and actualized those opportunities when they didn't have resources, they didn't have advanced degrees, they didn't have big ideas, right? I got a film crew, we're going all over the United States, ping-ponging, it's just a phenomenal experience, a life-changing experience. And I went to Tulsa, Oklahoma, and I interviewed a guy named Jim Stovall. The guy lost his eyesight at 29 and created a way that blind people could watch television. It's called narrative television network, right? Talk about starting from less than nothing. I'll tell you that story another day. So we were in Tulsa, and we were done with Tim's interview at noon. We weren't flying out till the next day, and I looked at the film guys and I said, what are we going to do from Tulsa the rest of the day? Let's go try to find some more entrepreneurs, right? See, I don't think like an employee anymore. I'm there with a film crew. I'm figuring out how to maximize the resources that I have. We're not going to knock off at noon. Hell no. Right? But most people are saying, oh, thank God it's Friday. The entrepreneurs are saying, thank God it's Monday. Right? They're hyper engaged. So we went into a coffee shop and we started asking perfect strangers, do you know any entrepreneurs? And a guy came in, he's waiting for his coffee. He said, you know, this guy goes to my church. His name is Clifton Talbert. He was one of the founders of the Stairmaster exercise. You guys heard of that, right? And I said, oh, that sounds interesting. Do you have his contact information? He said, yeah. He goes to my TV, he hands it to me. He hands me his phone, and I dial him. I said, Mr. Talbert, I'm standing right there in a coffee shop. Mr. Talbert, my name is Gary Schoninger. I'm doing this project for the Cisco Entrepreneur Institute. Only in town today. Any way we can come to your office for an interview. And he said, you know, okay, why don't you come around 3:30, 4 o'clock, near the end of the day, I'll do the interview, right? When you say you're working with Cisco, it kind of opens doors for people. Anyway, we showed up a couple hours later with these, crates full of cameras and tripods and lights and whatnot. And this is back in the day before there was a smartphone, right? This is clamshell days. Half of y'all don't remember those days, right? But I couldn't Google search them right there. So all I knew was part of the Stairmaster story. We came to his office and I had to explain all over to him. He said, wait a minute, who are you and what did I agree to do? And I had to explain it all over again. And Clifton was about 65 years old, I think, at the time. And I sat him down, I just met him, I got him to sign a talent release, which is a little bit awkward with a stranger. I got the camera set up, and in the corner of his office, you can find this video on YouTube, by the way. And I said, Mr. Talbert, how did you learn how to think like an entrepreneur? Like, what influenced you to do that? And he looked off in the middle distance and he said, long before this word entrepreneur became popular, the concept still existed. He said, I was born in 1945 to a teenage mother in a poor cotton community in a little town called Glen Allen, Mississippi. And he said, picking cotton was the expected way of life for people that looked like me. He said, since I was a little boy, he was raised by his relatives. He was essentially a foster kid. And he said, since I was a little boy, I was in the fields picking in cotton. That was the expected way of life. He said, every morning at 6 o'clock, Mr. Walter's field truck came by. He got out of that field truck. He drew me a picture on a napkin of like a military thing with a tent over the back and benches on it. And he was talking about the breadth of the adults, and he's a little boy sitting up underneath their feet, and they're kicking at him, and they're annoyed, and they're, they don't want to be there, but they don't see any opportunity, right? And Clifton said, all I could see was cotton. In every direction, 360 degrees, as far as I could see, all I saw was cotton. And then he pulled this picture out of a shoebox. He showed me a picture of his Uncle Cleve. He said, that's the man that taught me how to think like an entrepreneur. He said, Uncle Cleve owned the ice house. He said, when he was 13 years old, his uncle said, I want you to come and work alongside me in the ice house. And he said that was a pivotal moment. He said Uncle Cleve was had a 4th or a 5th grade education. He was not allowed into the bank, yet he had money in the bank. He said he was the only person in his community that put money in the bank. Banking was just a foreign concept. Right? Every 2 weeks, this little boy followed his uncle into Greenville into the bank and watched him walk in the back door. And little Clifton's looking around this, big, intimidating institution where they're not welcome. And watch his uncle with pride and dignity, not arrogance, but with just purpose and dignity, walked across the bank floor, gave the passbook, pulled out the bill overalls, gave it to the teller. And I said, what was Uncle Cleve teaching you? What kind of things? Well, he said he drove right past my house in the morning. He said maybe walk 2 miles to get to the ice house. He said, it's your job to get yourself there, and I'll get you home. You can only be late twice. He said he would drive me home. He'd drive me past the juke joints and say, see those guys hanging out in front of the juke joint? They're having all the fun they're ever going to have right now. He'd drive me past the cotton fields. He said, there's no future there for you because there's no thought required of you. 5 minutes into this interview, the hair on the back of my neck is standing straight up. About 2 hours later, I walked out of that office. I remember holding the door open for the film guys bringing out the gear. And I said, I don't know why, but that's how come we came to Tulsa. Like, that was what I was looking for. I was trying to demonstrate. This entrepreneurial mindset is an agentic mindset. Right? It empowers us. By solving problems for other people, we can empower ourselves. What Clifton said to me, you know what? 1958, before refrigeration, Glen Allen, Mississippi, is hot, and everybody needs ice. And even though people weren't all treating Uncle Cleve fairly, he treated everyone the same, regardless of how he was being treated. So that's how I met Clifton Tolbert. 2 years later, the former executive director, the founder of EntreEd, Kathy Ashmore, knew that I had been interviewing entrepreneurs. And she asked me to find a keynote speaker. I said, there's only one speaker, and it's Clifton Tolbert. And he graciously agreed to fly. He was on his way from a board meeting at J.P. Chase Morgan in New York. Agreed to fly to Austin to do the keynote there. Anyone, Horace, I know you were here. Anyone else in Austin in 2009? Right? You guys remember the standing ovation he got? That's how I got his attention. Right? Clifton didn't tell me till we wrote a book. He didn't tell me that he didn't want to tell the publicly tell that story. He said Uncle Cleve wasn't a millionaire. He didn't really think people would get it, that they would value that story. But after the EntreEd conference in 2009 in Austin, I got his attention. And I convinced him to co-write a book. Who Owns the Ice House? 8 Life Lessons from an Unlikely Entrepreneur. There are actually 8 life lessons distilled from hundreds and hundreds of interviews. We've got about 25 or 30 copies here. If you want to get one, you can see Joni in our session afterwards. But it's really the distillation of 8 core concepts that emerged from hundreds of interviews. Right? Things that are common and replicable. That's what I was looking for. If your dad just advanced you $1 million on your inheritance, I'm not interested in that story. If you got an IQ of 175, I'm not interested in that story. Right? I wanted to understand the factors that were common and replicable. They were IQ independent, resource independent, circumstance independent. Right? And those became the 8 concepts, the basis of the book. Then, with some initial funding from the Kauffman Foundation, we created the Ice House Entrepreneurship Program. Right? Really, and I'll dig into that just briefly a little bit here. Which, like any entrepreneurial journey, it went far beyond what I originally anticipated. This program is being used in so many different ways I could have never, ever predicted. From high schools to postdoctoral seminars, I just participated in a restorative justice program in a maximum security prison using the Ice House as part of restorative justice. Insane. Insane. But I want to tell you about one particular deployment that I did not anticipate. And that happened from the folks in Erie, PA. I want to tell you about that briefly. So some folks from Erie Public Schools came to us. You're going to hear from in our breakout session, Carol Unseld and Dave Cross. They came to us and they said, we want to do this Ice House thing for our middle school students in 7th grade. And I said, wait, what? This was not meant for middle school students. I don't think that curriculum is appropriate for middle school, you know. And they said, no, just we want to do this. Okay? And I was nervous a little bit because, you know, this is not what it's designed for. If it doesn't go well, it's not necessarily a good thing. Right? All right. So they just did a pilot. It was funded by United Way, Erie, Pennsylvania, a community in distress. They put 850 7th grade students through the Ice House program. Right? I want to just click through a couple of the outcomes that came from that program. Right? You can watch this video if you Google Ice House Erie. This video will come up, but I stole a couple screen captures here. These are 7th grade kids. This is what they're saying when they were asked. Carol asked them, like, what's your takeaway from the Ice House program? It allowed me to see things differently, to see more solutions than one problem, right? Having an entrepreneurial mindset changed how I see the world. Now I know I can change things. You know, one of the things she said before that, she said, I realize that I'm not the government, but I can change things. Right? What's that called? That's called self-efficacy. Isn't that the kind of the gold standard for educators? Right? And this kid, right? I know what I can do as a person to really build a future for myself. This is the one that brought me to tears. If we can all think about how we can change problems into opportunities, we can make Erie a better place. These are 13-year-old children. Right? Thank you, Carol and Dave. So, what are those underlying beliefs that drive entrepreneurial behavior? It's taken me 25 years to figure this out. It's a deeply held, mostly unconscious belief that it's up to me to figure out how to make myself useful to my fellow humans. And by doing so, I can empower myself. That's sort of the core assumption, mostly tacit, from which all other entrepreneurial behavior, that's where the discovery process begins. What do I care about? What do I know about? What skills do I have? Interests do I have? Abilities that I have? And how can I use those strengths, interests, and abilities to help my fellow man? And we know from a mountain of research coming from positive psychology at Penn that when a human being figures out how to match her strengths to something greater than herself, human flourishing occurs. Right? So I want to close with this statement that I found, written by the American theologian Richard Shaw, in which he said, education either functions as an instrument which is used to facilitate the integration of the younger generation into the logic of the present system, and bring about conformity, or it becomes the practice of freedom. The means by which men and women deal critically, creatively with reality and discover how to participate in the transformation of their world. Thank you very much.